You can all join palms and repeat after me. I take refuge in the Buddha.
I take refuge in the Buddha.
I take refuge in the Dharma.
I take refuge in the Dharma.
I take refuge in the Sangha.
I take refuge in the Sangha.
Keep the palms joined. Keep the palms down. All right, good evening, everybody. Good to see you all here. Thanks for showing up on this Tuesday evening. Anyone here for the first time? Want to share why they're here?
I want to learn more about this. So it can help me understand more about myself. That's why I'm here mainly.
Great. Glad you're here. Yeah. It's tough learning about ourselves sometimes. Yeah, glad you're here. Yeah. What brings you here?
Recommendation of a friend that sounds like a really beautiful, interesting experience.
The friend sitting next to you?
Yeah.
So we'll know who to blame if at the end of the hour you hate it, you know? Yeah, well, we'll try not to make it too bad. I have someone who often has been coming around for years, and every time they bring someone, you know, like family member, friend or something, they'll send me messages. They're like, Jeff, you better bring your A game tonight. My mom's coming, you know, or something like that. And often I'm like, well, as opposed to what game that I usually bring, you know? So, I don't know. I'm glad you're here. Thanks. Welcome, welcome. And the stragglers get to sit in the front. Come on up, Jeff. So you just make it too easy for me to pick on you, you know? There's a chair right there with your name on it.
Thank you.
And Nicole can camp out right next to you if she didn't just drop you off. She probably said, I don't need this stuff. I'm staying home.
She's in the restroom.
Yeah. So, well, welcome. Anyone else here for the first time after all that wants to share why they're here? Jeff, first time here. What brings you here?
Yeah, thanks. IFS.
Yeah.
So I've been looking at IFS, and it seems like it has a lot of Buddhist meditation, and getting still and quiet is something I'm interested in.
Yeah. It's tough. It's kind of the same thing with, you know, getting to know yourself. Getting still, getting quiet is challenging sometimes. Because when we get still and we get quiet, what are we left with? Ourselves. And how much fun is that usually? You know, it's challenging. So it's always I think, beautiful eye-opener to take some time, whether you're sitting for the first time or, you know, whether you've been at this for years, to begin to recognize, like, okay, what am I sitting with? You know, and I don't mean like what physically, but what mentally, what emotionally, what am I sitting with? What am I carrying? You know, what is sitting with me at this moment? And that'll change every time you sit. Also, by sit, I mean do a meditation practice. That changes every time. You know, maybe you had a wonderful day today. Who here had a wonderful day? So when you're sitting, this might be kind of nice initially because you're coming off a good day. Who here had a terrible day? Nobody? Phenomenal. I don't know what you're all doing here then. One, thanks, John. There's always at least one, the honest one in the room, right? So if you've had a terrible day or maybe a rough day or not such a great day, then when you sit with that, initially, maybe there's some angst, discomfort. Buddha calls it dukkha, some suffering. And so I think every time you sit, again, whether it's your first time or been at this for 20 years, every time you sit in meditation, it's important to kind of check in initially and say, okay, what am I sitting with right now? Is this pleasant? Is it unpleasant? Is it neutral? Is it happiness? Is it joy? Is it sadness? Is it anger? Is it frustration? Is it excitement? Whatever it is, it's good to kind of pay attention to that, because those feelings, those emotions that arise, they're with us all day and they change throughout the day. And without really knowing it, those emotions and those thoughts that we sit with, they have a massive impact on our day-to-day, lives. So it's always good just to kind of check in with how you're feeling when you sit. Jeff saved you a seat right here in the front row, Nicole. Sorry. All right. So, with that, again, for those who are new, welcome. For our millions of YouTube followers, thanks for being here. Feel free to chime in, say hello. We'll start with the meditation practice. A couple things to tell you before we begin. Nothing's going to happen to you. You're not going to float away. You won't have any mystical, magical experiences. The mind that races all day long is not going to shut off. Don't judge your practice when you don't ask yourself, is this working or not working? Are you doing it right or wrong? We're just going to sit. We're going to breathe. You'll hear sounds inside the room, sounds outside. This is life. Life is filled with chaos. And this practice is learning to get quiet and still within all of that chaos. So posture. If you are on a cushion somewhere, often it helps slide into the front third, pushing the stomach forward, allows the back to straighten. If you're on a chair or on a bench, however you're seated, same thing. Trying to sit upright, shoulders are relaxed, feet ideally flat on the ground. Hands can be on the knees or in the lap. If you need to move during meditation, simply move. Movement doesn't make you a bad meditator. It just means your leg hurts, you have an itch, right? So you just simply move and return to stillness. I'll guide us as we begin, and we'll settle into a little bit of silence. Most important with this practice, don't expect anything. We'll be done about midnight. And starting with the eyes closed, if comfortable, or slightly open. Mouth is open or closed, whatever's comfortable. We'll start with taking 3 deep breaths, slowly. And eventually, settle into a natural rhythm of the breath. Noticing the mind as it wanders, jumping from thought to thought. Start with gently guiding the attention, focus, to the stomach or chest. Breathing in, feel them rise. Breathing out, they fall. Simply continue this practice, observing sensation of breath, expecting nothing but to sit and breathe. As the mind wanders, lost in thought, recognize it, release that thought, return attention, focus to the breath. letting go of expectations, letting go of judgment from the practice, just sitting, breathing. Breathing in, follow breath in. Breathing out, follow breath out. Keeping the mind alert, aware of each sound, each thought, each physical sensation, yet concerned with nothing but sitting, breathing. And with the body still, rested, and the speech quiet, aware of all sounds, and the mind learning to settle. Know what it's like to just sit and breathe. Knowing with each breath, there's nothing else to do. Nowhere else to go. No one else to be. Everything beautiful, exactly as it is. Sitting, breathing. And once again, taking 3 deep breaths, slowly. And as you slowly open the eyes, slowly beginning to move, most important with the practice of meditation is to recognize how you feel now, immediately after, compare this to how you typically feel throughout your day. Recognize the difference, if there is one. Ask yourselves how you'd prefer to feel every day for the rest of your life. And realize however you feel now, if it's quiet, calm, and still, or a busy mind, racing mind, whatever you're sitting with at this moment, has nothing to do with anything I said. It's nothing to do with how we sit and hold the hands or cross the legs. It's nothing to do with the sounds around us or anything else for that matter. It has everything to do with your own mind and your own mind's reaction to an external condition. This is what the Buddha called pratitya samutpata, means dependent origination. This is the basis of the Buddha's awakening. The word Buddha simply means awakened. He was a human being, no different than any one of us, who began to understand why he suffered, why he got angry, sad, depressed, stressed, anxious. He began to understand the causal relationship of all phenomena. And what that means, very simply, for all of us, regardless of where you come from or what you believe in or where you think you're going, your whole life is filled with things that happen. You react. More stuff happens, more reactions. That's our day. This practice is learning what it's like to respond to something quietly, peacefully, still. Because for most of us, the way you responded to the last 20 minutes is quite different from how you respond to everything else that's happening throughout your days. And so all we're working on is closing the gap to where the way you feel now is closer to how you feel always. Just as driven, motivated, productive, successful, whatever that means to you in your respective lives, but with a mind that's steady, clear, and focused, distracted by nothing, disturbed by no one. Imagine going a day without being disturbed by someone. Imagine going an hour without being disturbed by someone. This practice is not an escape, as often people think it is, especially those who might be newer to Buddhist practice or meditation. If your life is a hectic, crazy, stressed out mess, this doesn't fix that. This makes you become aware of it. So you can then begin to make changes in your life. So your life is less of a hectic, stressed out mess. Meditation, Buddhist practice, they're not things that we run to solve all of our problems. It's a practice of sitting, getting to know the self. So you begin to understand where all of the problems in your life are coming from. And the good news is the answer is really simple. Every problem in your life comes from one place and one place only. And where's that? And it ain't the person sitting next to you. Your own mind, your own thoughts. That's it. That doesn't mean you're not in difficult situations or that you don't have conflict or you don't have people that drive you crazy all day long or people who do horrific things. Those all exist. But the suffering that we feel, that we experience, is in our minds. And the practice is to work through that and understand the nature of our own mind. All the things in the world that are around us that are just terrible, they're never going away. They will change. But they're always going to be there. And so the practice is to recognize, how do we respond in these situations to things in life that are just not okay. Meditation is free. Buddhist practice is free. It's not a business. It's a practice and a way of life. Once we stop trying to change, control, fix, manipulate everyone around us, which is where we spend so much of our time, hoping they do this, hoping they do that, wishing they would do this, wishing they would do that. So much time pointing fingers and blaming everyone else around us. This practice is waking up to, what can we change so we can be at peace within our own minds and our own hearts as we go through the day. And that's why it is just a practice. It's not a quick fix. It's not a 6-week course. It's not something that all of a sudden in 2 months you're going to have this stuff figured out. It is something to explore every day the rest of your life. And when I say something, I'm not talking about meditation or Buddhism specifically. I'm talking about the nature of your own mind. We get to explore that the rest of our lives, if we choose to. Meditation, Buddhist practice is just one of many tools that allows you to explore the nature of your mind. So it's just a mirror reflecting back. And that's why when you said you wanted to get to know yourself, and that's all the practice is. That's it. So with that, I'll pause. For me, I really always prefer just to respond to questions. Meditation, Buddhist practice, anything you're sitting with. We'll use the rest of our brief time this evening, and I'll respond to what's on your mind. To those who are joining virtually, again, welcome. Feel free to chime in. There's a chat box there on your screen. Feel free to put some questions in there, and I'll do my best to respond to you as well. So, questions? Yes, sir.
Can you please go over the 3 different the different schools?
Schools of Buddhism? Sure. Yeah. So the question, and I'll always roughly repeat questions, even though you probably are close enough to the microphone to hear it. But the question was, can I go over the 3 different schools of Buddhism? So there are 3 major schools, right? And very brief 60-second intro for anyone who's not aware. The Buddha was just a human, wasn't a god. He lived in India 2,500 years ago, 500 years before Christ. And he was a prince, 29 years as a prince, and snuck out one night. He saw what's called the 4 sights. He saw old age, sickness, and death. And he saw an ascetic, kind of like a simple nun or monk living their simple life. And he went back to the palace and he said to his buddy Chana, like, there's a world of old age, sickness, death out there. Does that happen to everybody? And Chana said, yeah, that happens to all of us. And he said, well, how can I live in a life of wealth and riches surrounded with everything as a prince when there's people out there suffering? And so he left, roamed the base of the Himalayan mountains for 6 years. At 35 years old, he had what they call the awakening, where 5 guys who he was traveling with before came back to him and they said, there's Siddhartha. Looks like he's figured something out. We'll sit with him. He taught the 4 Noble Truths, which is the core beginning of Buddhist teachings. First one is suffering. We all experience discomfort, angst, dissatisfaction in our lives. The second one is, what's the cause? He said the cause of our suffering, known as the 3 poisons, is greed, anger, ignorance. So we practice generosity, compassion, wisdom to overcome that. The third one, he said, is there's an ending to suffering, and that's liberation, nirvana, happy day. And the 4th one is the path. That's the 8-fold path. Correct views, thought, speech, action, livelihood, effort, mindfulness, concentration. All of that is on Google for free. So just Google Four Noble Truths, Eightfold Path, stay on the first 2 pages, and you're good to go. Okay? And then spend the rest of your life practicing it. The reason I share that is I just want to kind of set the stage for then how Buddhism spread. So then he taught for 45 years, and then he died. And this is India. About 100 years after he died, Buddhism goes south. Thailand, Laos, Vietnam, Cambodia, and you have the development of what's called, initially they called it Hinayana, and then Mahayana came later, and then Vajrayana. I'll touch on those in a minute. But they eventually changed the first school of Buddhism, Hinayana, which means lesser vehicle, to Theravada, which literally translates to of the elders. The reason they call it that is it's based on what's called the Pali Canon, which they say are the original teachings of the Buddha. Okay? Now, I talked about this on Saturday. You remember the old school like telephone game where like you're a kid and you sit in a circle? And over here you say like bicycle? And then everybody like whispers in everybody's ears and it goes around 40 kids and it ends up being like, I don't know, orange, right? Buddhism is kind of like that. Okay. And the reason I say that is they weren't sitting there with like iPhones recording stuff. Everything was memorized. So for about 100 years, all they did was memorize the Buddhist teachings. Then a council came together. I'm not a scholar. I don't study Buddhism this way, but somewhere 50 to 100 years after he died, they said, this is some good stuff. We should write it down. And it got the sutras, majority of the sutras start out, thus have I heard, at such and such place, at such and such time, the Buddha once said. So they're retelling 100 years of memory of what they think the Buddha said. Okay? And that gets written down in what's called the Pali Canon. And so that school of Buddhism, again, initially Hinayana, then they changed the name to Theravada, of the elders, is one major school of Buddhism. About 500 years later, around the turn of the century, it goes north into China, Japan, Korea, and you have the development of what's called Mahayana Buddhism. Okay, this is when they changed the name. Mahayana, Y-A-N-A, means vehicle. So Hinayana means lesser vehicle. Mahayana, Maha is greater, means greater vehicle. But again, somewhere along the way, 500 years in, they realized that it really wasn't so Buddhist to call Buddhist teachings greater or lesser than the other. Right? I mean, there aren't like Buddhists like at war with each other because they're fighting over their school of Buddhism. So they changed it to Theravada. But Mahayana, this is where you get what's called predominantly the Prajnaparamita Sutras, Perfection of Wisdom Sutras, Diamond Sutra, Heart Sutra, Lotus Sutra, things like that. That's the second school of Buddhism. Okay. The third school is about 1,000 years after the Buddha died. It goes into Tibet. And you have the development of what's called Vajrayana. Vajra is diamond vehicle. So that's Vajrayana, diamond vehicle, Mahayana, greater vehicle, Hinayana, lesser vehicle, or Theravada. And Tibetan Buddhism is really cool because it kind of just stayed in Tibet, wasn't really influenced by anything too much outside of Tibetan culture. Where when it goes into China, for example, right, it meshed with Shintoism, Taoism, Confucianism. So you have a meshing of the culture and religious spiritual beliefs with Buddhism as well. Now, the fascinating thing about the spread of Buddhism is that when it goes into a new place, it really just kind of meshes with what's already existing there. Okay? And so here we are in the year 2022, sitting in San Diego. Quick show of hands. How many of you are Buddhist? There's not a single hand up in the room. Right? Being Buddhist isn't what's important. What's important is how do we be kind to ourselves and everybody else? Whether Christian, Catholic, Muslim, Jewish, pagan, whatever your beliefs are or lack thereof, just be kind. And, 100, 200 years, 300 years from now, one of the things I dislike the most is the phrase American Buddhism. How American is it to call it ours, It's like the most American thing to do. It's like, we're going to call this American. We're going to make American Buddhism. I mean, what else can make our own, Buddhism was just fine without the word American in front of it, So 300 years from now, they'll look back and they'll say, okay, what did Buddhism become in this country that we at some point in time called America? And we'll see, and within that, Tibetan Buddhism has 4 major schools. Mahayana, Tibetan Buddhism also is kind of looked at under the umbrella of Mahayana Buddhism. because of what's called the Bodhisattva path, which is the practice of the Bodhisattva is to be reborn life after life and to live every day for the benefit of everybody. To vow to free all beings from their suffering.
Compassion for others.
Compassion for others, always starting where?
Yourself.
So, always. It is often, for many people, a lot easier to have compassion for others. Right? I mean, we'll do like the kindest things to strangers, people we don't even know. And then we treat ourselves like crap. Isn't that odd? You know? Be nice to yourself once in a while, because you're important too. And very often having that self-compassion, self-love is really, really challenging for so many of us, because we just don't have enough practice with it. You know? So Zen Buddhism is Mahayana school as well. But yeah, it's a general overview. Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Are you able to provide like a personal situation or practice that you've gone through that ties into how Buddhism aids with lingering negative thoughts or depression or sorrow? Just thinking you personally hearing not so much the overview of Buddhist tools, but kind of like a real life situation where, as this is a lifelong journey, you've maybe, and I'm not going to put words in your mouth.
Oh, you can. That's okay.
Okay, then I'll put words in your mouth.
That's all right.
I don't know if it's getting over something, moving on from something, dealing with something, whatever terminology it is, but how with the negative thought or especially the depression of a circumstance you've gone through, how does your practice help you move with, on, or through that?
Yeah, great question. You're really just asking about the last 19 years of my life, right? So let me, try to highlight maybe one or two examples. But I mean, I grew up incredibly angry, incredibly depressed, lots of fights, lots of trouble. Drinking beer, smoking pot, getting into fights, playing sports. That was my life. Just a tiny bit of ego, tiny bit of arrogance, tiny bit of cockiness, right? All exaggerations. I mean, I don't know that you could have been any more arrogant or cocky or confident than I was. And filled with anger and rage and hatred and bullying and picking on people. That sums up, probably the first 25 years of my life. No joke. It's actually 5 years ago today. It's a much longer story, but when you get home, just Google The Bully and the Buddhist. It's an article that my dear friend Eric Stoyer wrote about me being a bully and bullying him as a child. And it ended up on the cover of Southwest magazine in November 5 years ago. So millions of people saw my ugly mug in the backseat of an airplane telling my whole story, which was really beautiful and also like really cathartic, because like, wow, now everybody can really see that when I talk about what an asshole I was, I'm not joking, 2006, some of you may have heard this story before, but I had just come back from the monastery. I was there 11 months in Taiwan. And as I said, I grew up super angry and thought I had a right to everything, Getting off the freeway, right? I had gone through this phase of attempting to abandon all my worldly possessions at this time, except, of course, for my convertible Mustang, which I wanted to hang on to, because every good Buddhist should have one of those. And I'm getting off the freeway, tops down, 2 lanes. I cut in front of the other car, right? arms here on the window. All of a sudden I get hit with something. And what had happened was it was 3 or 4 kids. I cut them off getting off the freeway. They didn't like it. They took a 32-ounce big gulp, Hawaiian punch, and they threw it at me. Now, when it hit me, my first immediate thought was laughter. Why did I laugh? Because if the throw had been too low, it would have hit the side of the car. Too high, would have gone over my head. Dude, it was a perfect shot. Right on the window, top came off. I'm in a white shirt, white car, covered in Hawaiian punch. And I laughed because I would have been the same 17-year-old punk that would have thrown that. So I could relate to that deeply. First thought was laughter. And then I immediately kicked into sadness. Sadness that we grow up so angry, so confused, so ignorant, that just because one car gets in front of the other, that we feel we must throw something at someone, right? I get downtown, my buddy comes out, I'm covered in Hawaiian punch. He's like, dude, what happened to you? I tell him the story, right? It wasn't until a long time later I realized anger never arose. Now, if that had been 10 years earlier, I would have taken the baseball bat that was in my trunk, and it would have been a whole different story, right? I have about 1,000 examples like that. It is literally every day of my life. Thoughts arise. You recognize there's that thought, and you move on. Because that thought is filled with ego and pride. The thoughts, at least for me personally, 20 years of this practice, the thoughts don't necessarily change. What changes is you stop doing stupid things. You stop acting on the thoughts. And that will drastically change your life and the life of those around you. Anger that you've carried, that I've carried for so many years about things, I was able to just see them for what they are, which is a massive state of confusion. And to be able to set that down and say, Jeff, you're just human. You're doing the best you can with what you got. Keep going. So I don't know if that answers your question, but hopefully it helps somewhere. Yeah. But you got to be patient, man. It's not like 2 meditation classes and, 3 weeks of Buddhist stuff, and all of a sudden all the anger you've been carrying your whole life is going to go away. If you've been angry for 40 years, it's going to take more than 6 weeks to get rid of it. So yeah, every single day you have opportunities to practice seeing the suffering in others. And that will deeply impact your life when you can truly see their suffering as your own. Yeah. Other questions? Yeah.
Do you think that seeing others suffering, do you think that it helps you realize more of your own suffering that you're going through as well, that you could potentially relate to?
So the question, do I think seeing other people suffering, does that help me realize my own suffering that I can relate to? I think that for me early on with practice, yes, that when I saw other people suffer, I was able to maybe understand my suffering and connect with their suffering. But then you just have suffering and suffering, right? And so I think over time with practice, you begin to recognize that it's not about your suffering. It's not about my suffering. If I see people are suffering, why do I need to make that about my suffering? Why can't I just help them? And my suffering is gone. You ever helped someone? How do you feel? Good. When you're helping them, it's not about you. It's about them. That's the practice. So for me, I think it's really important to eventually realize that we could spend, and this is where I always talk about the difference between Buddhist practice and therapy. Both important. As I often say, half of you in here are in therapy, half of you are therapists, and some of you are both, right? Therapy is incredibly important. Buddhist practice, incredibly important, but there's a difference. And what I mean by that is therapy is really about getting to the root of understanding everything, digging everything out, looking at it, trauma when you were 7, whatever. It's like really living all that over and over and over again. Has its value and incredibly important. Buddhist teaching says there's no self. So who is it who's even suffering to begin with? And for those of you not familiar with the non-self teachings, what it really means in brief is to understand that you are here. You exist. You're not here. You just exist completely differently from how you perceive yourself to be. So the whole stories you've been telling yourself your whole life, all of us, you're not this enough, you're not that enough, you wish you were this, all these stories are just stories. That's not who you are. Those are experiences you've had. And you are forever changing every moment. So non-self is to understand that you can't just attach yourself to a certain person and story and say, this is Jeff. I'm just some dude, some human with experiences. And what I know from my practice that my master taught me from day one is that she said, Jeff, for someone like you, busy is the best nutrition. Spend the rest of your life helping people. And there is no suffering to become aware of. But you can't analytically make sense of that. As the Buddha said, don't believe stuff just because he said it. Try it. See what happens if you work on spending every moment of your life helping other people. See how much you suffer. If you do that and you suffer more, then it didn't work for you. But if you do that and you suffer less, then phenomenal. But that's what I was taught with Buddhist practice a long time ago. And for me, it's been quite nice. So I'm not trying to compare my suffering to others. I'm not trying to relate to people on this level of suffering. We're all human. We all suffer. It's part of the experience. But when you make it not about you anymore, that's really what this practice is about. So, but most of us don't wake up every morning and feel hungry and think, I hope the world has food to eat. Wake up in the morning, we're hungry, and you think, what am I going to have for breakfast? Maybe shift that a little bit. Maybe wake up, recognize you're hungry, and think, what could I do right now that could allow or help someone else have a meal in this very moment? And maybe delay my hunger 10 minutes to see how I can help somebody else with their hunger. See what that does. Any other questions? So there's sorry, Brian, I'm not laughing at you. I'm laughing with you. Let me just share this as kind of a thought. So Brian commented here, someone threw something at my car today. So clearly the story was for Brian. What's your name? Sorry. Eric, this story, thank you for bringing that up because it was for Brian right here. He needed it more than Eric did. Someone threw something at my car today after I cut them off. I'm still feeling rage. I drove around looking for them for 30 minutes. I hope to react differently in the future. I hope you do too, Brian. I mean, like today, so here it is. It's just now 8 o'clock, and it happened, I don't know what time, maybe 5 hours ago, 10 hours ago. And like, you're so angry. 30 minutes you drove looking for them. I mean, I'm just glad you didn't find them, But here's the thing. A absolute stranger that you don't know in some piece of metal machinery got in front of yours. And the funny thing is, we're so like territorial, like, I could write a whole book on like Buddhism and driving, I have a news flash for you all. A great way to practice in Buddhism, it's called dana, generosity. A great way to practice dana, generosity in driving is when you're in a lane and you see a car next to you with their blinker on, and they want to get over, you do know it's possible to slow down and let them in, right? You can do that. Most people are not aware of this, right? But it is possible. And oh, by the way, when you do that, whether you liked it or not, or maybe they got in front of you and you didn't want them to, it has not altered your life at all. Maybe they delayed you like, what, a half a second? So this car getting in front of you, Brian, and again, I laugh with you, not at you. This car getting in front of you didn't change anything in your life, except for the fact that you wasted 30 minutes driving around looking for them, you know? And I'm going to stop on the car metaphors, but yeah. Another car one is when the car slows down. See, for me, back to your question, Eric, it's like, this is the beauty of Buddhist practice. It's like, there's no car sutra. You know, there's no like the Pali Canon Sutra from 2,500 years ago on like driving. But here we are with cars. So how do we use Buddhist practice in our daily lives if you have a car, okay? And when a car is in front of you and they slow down, put on their brakes, slow down. It is also possible for you to just slow down and remain in your lane. You don't have to swerve over just because the car in front of you slowed down. Another Buddhist teaching is patience. How many of you here lack patience? Just go driving, my friends, on the 805 at 5 o'clock to practice patience. Because I can promise you this, reading another Buddhist book about patience will not teach you patience. Reading another sutra about patience will not teach you patience. If you want to learn patience, put yourselves in situations that require patience. When cars slow down, be patient, slow down. Think about them. Maybe they needed to slow down. Not about us. So, thanks, Brian, for sharing that. Any final thoughts or questions or comments before we close? All right, everybody good? Cool. So we'll join palms. We'll do what's called a transfer of merit. May any merit gained from this practice be transferred to all beings in all directions. May all be at peace and free from suffering. May this merit be transferred to more than 6 million lives that have been lost during this pandemic, their family and friends who continue to suffer, and to Venerable Master Yizhe during her time of rebirth. May all be at peace and all free from suffering. So before you head out, our incredible Dharma Bum host, Carly, will have a few announcements for y'all.
I restrained myself. I wanted to slide in.
You could have.
Maybe next time. Good evening. I'm Carly. I'm tonight's host. We opened the Dharma Bum Temple 15 years ago to introduce Buddhist practice to those who show up. Those who lead are not nuns, monks, gurus, masters, or teachers, and are not looking for students. They're simply practitioners sharing our interpretation of the practice with others. Just about every night, we have different classes led by different people from various Buddhist traditions. We have a recovery sangha that meets several times a week for anyone battling addiction, drugs, alcohol, or anything else for that matter. A family sangha for parents, kids, toddlers, and teens, which currently meets once a month. And we also offer a half-day silent retreat the first Saturday of the month with an RSVP required. Everything we offer here is always free. The full schedule is on our website. And also posted in the entryway above the shoe rack. We also have a lending library. If you see a book you like, feel free to borrow it and then bring it back whenever you're done with it. And as you head out tonight, if you could straighten your chair, your cushion, that would help us keep things tidy. And we hope to see you again.
Thanks, Carly. Thank you all. Have a good night.
Thank you, Jim.
Thank you.